let's get started. I'm Darlene Viggiano, and I am going to speak with you today, and hopefully you'll speak back about cultural and spiritual competence in the workplace. This is for MFTs, LCSWs, nurses who work with psychiatric patients, students in the mental health field. So I was originally going to have a partner with me, Sonia, Rahel, Ahmadzai, and she's not able to make it after all. So I'll be taking over the reins for today. See, I had tried prior to us getting together, getting the slides to advance, and they advanced, and now of course they will not. So I don't know if my room monitor has any suggestions or ways to make that happen, but right now it's not wanting to play. So I'm gonna see if I can do a workaround so that we don't miss out on too much here. Yeah, bad idea to go full screen on this. It doesn't want to do anything right now. So let's go ahead and turn on our mics and talk to each other about your interests and concerns, because this way we'll be able to use our time wisely, regardless of the fact that my software is not cooperating with me. Oh, there it is. Here's my agenda. Okay. So, oh, and somebody's got something going on in the chat box. Let me check with you. Okay. My room attendant was able to help us, I think. So in any case, the things that we're going to be going over today include ethical policies, guidelines, and standards. Ooh, okay. For a culturally and spiritually competent psychological practice. Clashes between our personal integrity and corporate ideals. Cultural and spiritual competence as an ethical obligation, individual bias and corporate culture, the various alignments and challenges there, honoring personal beliefs, practices, and performance, productivity expectations, personal and organizational development in the mental health workplace, implicit bias, research findings on diversity in the workplace, ethnocentrism, microaggression, and xenophobia, their workplace effects. And so we'll start off with the ethical policies, guidelines, and standards that impact mental health disciplines. I want you all to feel free to come off mute at any time and interrupt me at any time, so that I can make sure that you're getting what you want and what you need. And if there's any technical glitches, we can attend to those as well. In any case, competencies for addressing spiritual and religious issues in counseling were established by the Association of Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling way back in 2009. And they provide guidelines for counselors to implement in conjunction with evidence-based counseling practices. And spiritual competencies complement the ethics code established by the American Counseling Association. And that was in 2014. The gold there is really hard to read. I tried to get it to change to purple and it wouldn't go. But it's a clickable link. So you're going to be getting the slides and you'll be able to click on the link for yourself. And so the point is promoting increased cross-cultural sensitivity and proficiency in counseling. And you can see the reference here and also click on that link for full details on that reference. First thing that comes up is clashes between our personal integrity and corporate ideals. Of course, our personal integrity may be informed by our spirituality, and corporate ideals may be informed by the bottom line. So that could be a clash right there. So I want to give you a sneak preview of an item that's going to come up on your quiz at the end for your CEU credit. And go ahead and unmute so that you can participate and answer about this. Which of the following is a core concept of cultural competency? Spiritual competency, awareness of one's own biases and reactions, trust, respect for, and openness to different cultural perspectives, cultural security, moving beyond cultural awareness to actively ensuring that cultural needs are met, working towards equal opportunity, equity, fairness, and social justice, or all of the above. Anybody have any ideas or guesses?
All of the above.
Yeah. So let's go a little deeper into this. It's kind of easy to answer a multiple choice question, but this question is not something that's going to appear on your quiz. It's something for us to talk about together as a group. Dignity and cultural security. What do they mean to you personally? What meaning do they carry in your corporate culture? And hopefully your bosses aren't here and they won't hear you answering. But even if they are, better to get it out in the open and deal with it. So who would like to take a crack at this? Feel free to come on camera too. It's nice to see smiling faces or even falling asleep faces that I know I have to wake up. How can you tell if your corporation or organization treats you with dignity and cultural sensitivity and those kinds of things? Yeah, go for it, Jamie. Oh, okay. All right, we've got a chatter. Being able to practice aspects of my culture without fear of retribution. Excellent answer. Excellent answer. And Sarah has come into the room. Okay, very good. Let's move on. See if it goes this way. Okay, interesting. Cultural and spiritual competence as an ethical obligation. So more than 80% of 2,050 study participants agreed or strongly agreed that spirituality was important to their mental health. Consumers found the following helpful to their mental health: prayer, 73%, meditation, 47%, attending religious services, 40%, spending time in nature, 41%, and they should have those backwards, right? And reading sacred texts or spiritual self-help books, 36%. Ratings of the importance of spirituality and perceived spiritual respect by providers were the strongest predictors of interest in integrating spirituality into mental health services. This comes from Yamada, Lukoff, Lim, Mancuso, and it's from this year, integrating spirituality and mental health. These are perspectives of adults receiving public mental health services in California. So I don't know how this would translate, say, for example, if you did the study in Louisiana or in Alaska. But this is how the numbers came out in California. And then there is a quote here that I like very much. Jeppy Hansgaard says, people are less likely to act on their conscious or unconscious biases when the facts are made transparent and they know that they might have to explain their behaviors. So we're talking accountability here. And the website from which that was taken is listed below as well. Individual bias and corporate culture, alignments and challenges. We're going to go a little deeper into this now. Religion and spirituality have been empirically linked to a number of psychological health and well-being outcomes, yet religious and spiritual issues most often are not discussed in psychotherapy, nor are they included in assessment or treatment planning. And one thing I would like to encourage here in our group among us is that we begin to assess for the importance of spirituality to our clients so that we can include it in treatment planning. This is a regular part of my practice. I use a biopsychosocial spiritual approach. And so I assess people on biological, psychological, social, and spiritual dimensions. And then I make a treatment plan with them, not for them, regarding those 4 areas for healing and recovery from whatever it is they're going through. And that doesn't matter whether it's all the way to schizophrenia or all the way to an adjustment disorder. Okay. The field of psychology has already included religion and spirituality in most definitions of multiculturalism and requires training in multicultural competence, but most psychotherapists receive little or no training in religious and spiritual issues. I think one of the reasons for this is that, there is pastoral counseling almost as a separate discipline, and it's as if, never the twain shall meet. But I think one of the difficulties with that is that in pastoral counseling, you have to be a pastor of a specific religion, whereas many people do not espouse a particular church or sect. They simply feel the need for their spirituality to be taken into consideration in therapy. I'm working with a European fellow right now who is getting his master's in psychology and is having to do a thesis. And he did, for his thesis, a study on gay men who were raised in Catholic settings at home and in church and in school, like Catholic school and such, and the spiritual emergency or crisis that they go through when they realize that their religion espouses one set of ethical behaviors, principles, and ways of being and living in the world, and their biology and their inner psychology and their social proclivities bring them to another set of behaviors and norms, and they don't match, and they don't know what to do with that. And it's very upsetting and frightening and scary for them. Do they have to reject their Catholicism? Do they have to reject their being gay? What do they have to do? And so he did his study on that, and how important it is that when these people arrive in psychotherapy, that the therapist asks them, well, how did your spiritual upbringing affect your current beliefs and status with regard to your lifestyle, your romance, your relationships, all of that. And a lot of times it gets neglected. In fact, it's quicker and easier to ask about your sexuality than it is about your spirituality, apparently. In any case, for us in the workplace as practitioners, we also have some areas where we bump up against some difficulties. So discrimination and harassment complaint systems need to do a better job, according to researchers at Harvard University and Tel Aviv University. Half of discrimination and harassment complaints produce retaliation. And this goes back to what our group member said a little while ago, is that we know that we are valued and that we have dignity when we can practice our spirituality without fear of retaliation. Yet people find that that is not the case in the workplace oftentimes. Workers who complain of harassment have worse careers, mental health, and physical health than those who experience similar levels of harassment but do not complain, which scares the heck out of me, because we need to be able to complain about these things and be made whole. Accused harassers are extremely unlikely to be transferred or to lose their jobs. And to me, even being transferred often is not good enough, because then that just puts the problem somewhere else. Managers accused of discrimination are rarely sanctioned in any way. And I think that's because, the top gets away with a lot and the bottom gets pounded and fired a lot very easily. There is like a privilege that comes when you get to the top. Grievance procedures carry confidentiality clauses that permit serial abusers to reoffend. So if someone has been committing microaggressions or full aggressions against people for their religious practices, maybe you've seen people who wear turbans being called towel heads or something like that. If somebody makes a grievance about that, that gets put in a confidential file, and if it comes up again, then it might not be able to be pulled up that the original offense happened prior. After employers create grievance procedures, they see significant decreases in representation of minority men and women in management. So even though they have the procedures in place, these just are used to point up, okay, who's going to be a complainer? And they don't allow people to fix things and to still be able to get through the glass ceiling. So employee assistance plans, ombuds offices, and transformative dispute resolution systems are the things that can solve some of these problems. And so folks at Harvard and Tel Aviv universities do work on those kinds of systems and programs to ensure that there's a way around these difficulties going forward. Next, we're going to talk a little bit more deeply about honoring personal beliefs and practices within performance and productivity expectations. So I'd like to ask the group, and please feel free to unmute and respond, or go into the chat box and respond if you prefer. Are you personally missing your holidays and religious events because your spiritual calendar is in conflict with the expectations set by your corporate office? And or is there a chaplain or a room for meditation or prayer in your mental health setting? Anybody can pick up on either one of those and begin a discussion there. For example, we just had Good Friday. Anybody able to take it off? For example, if you are someone who celebrates Ramadan, are you able to say your prayers 5 times a day in your work setting? Does a prayer room or a meditation room even exist? Is it even considered part of mental health for you? Someone says, I work in a public school, so there's no space for prayer. We did get Good Friday off for spring break. Another says, my agency supports our personal beliefs, which is awesome. Another one says, no, but governmentally and the workplace is set up to work around Christian religious holidays. It's less accommodating to other religions, if at all. And that's normally the case, unfortunately. Let's see what other ones came up here. And somebody said, yes, I guess they meant to both questions. And yes, when I used to go to work, yeah, a lot of us are working from home these days. A lot of us have yes and yes, and some have no and yes. And there's a new message as well. A safe room or meditation room is important in an agency environment. It seems rare. I can tell you personally that when I used to work at Kaiser Permanente, they did have a meditation and prayer room, and they did have a chaplain. They were big on diversity in a certain sense, but there were other areas in which they had some cutting edge or leading edge accomplishments that still need to be made. Let's see, where else are people speaking up on this? Is there, okay. Being able to practice, oh, yeah, okay, I guess we got all of the responses to these questions. Good. Personal and organizational development in the mental health workplace. We're looking at increasing cultural and spiritual competencies to improve service. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So ethical and competent professionals follow 4 steps to increase cultural competence regarding religious and spiritual multiculturalism. First, being aware of biases. Like we said, the organizations often recognize Christian holidays and not any other area of spirituality. Considering religion like any other type of diversity. So for example, if we're going to honor diversity, we need to honor it inclusive of race, creed, color, gender diversity, and also spirituality and different ages as well. And then taking advantage of available resources, meaning that, as it says in number 4, consulting colleagues, including clerics, being able to have resources and referrals within the community of the religious belief. So for example, I've worked with a lot of Hmong folks, and for them, they use shamans, and they have shamans that they go to for consultation and for spiritual upliftment. And I find it very comfortable and easy and normal and natural to ask them about, have they been to their shaman about this particular issue? What kinds of advice are they receiving? And how does that fit with them trying to fit into the wider culture of where they live and where they work and their neighborhood and all of that? And how can we help them blend that together? So according to the research from Plant in 2014, not to do those 4 things is not only unethical, but also can lead to malpractice. And I don't think people are cognizant enough about this, that, it isn't just a matter of ethics. There is a legal aspect to this, and it's an important one. So let's talk about implicit spiritual bias. And again, if you would be willing to unmute your mics, it'll be really helpful to talk amongst ourselves and have a conversation, because I don't even know if I could find my chat box anymore, for one thing. Have you experienced cultural appropriation of your spiritual practices? So for example, Easter is all about the eggs and the bunnies and, not about resurrection anymore. Or in any other religion, say, for example, Hinduism, has your yoga been appropriated for the purposes of exercise as opposed to spiritual growth and development? Has there been surface lip service to diversity goals, neglecting spirituality? So if we can see the difference, we'll include the difference, but if we can't see the difference, then the difference doesn't exist, right? What is an example of spiritual microaggression? Let's see, we got a chatter here. With me, I see others practicing Holi, which takes away from the purpose of the holiday. Okay, so it would be great if Deshelle could come on and speak more about that and enlighten us all about that.
Yes, so I practice Sikhism. So with the Holi holiday, it's an Indian holiday that celebrates like the new year and new beginnings. And so we participate in like the throwing of different colors.
Yep.
So, and you do this amongst your family and your community members. And I see a lot in the Western world where they made it like, oh, it's a color run, or, they, it's been appropriated into something that it's not intended to be. So it is not only a religious holiday, but also a cultural holiday as well. So I think when others like partake in it and they don't understand the meaning, it takes away from those of us who like practice that.
Yes, and I have seen and been to festivals, and nobody has ever even so much as put up a poster about, you know, what the colors represent or what it means to put color on each other. And it has become more of, you know, just kind of a reason to celebrate in community, which is not a bad thing, but some of the depth and soulfulness of the practice gets buried behind that. Also, somebody says, yes, in a prominently Christian environment, earth-based beliefs and practices are often referred to as evil. And boy, is that ever an aggression. You know, we talk about microaggressions, but some of those quote unquote microaggressions can turn out to be quite macro. Another person responds, I did not know that information about the color run. Thank you for that. I will be more mindful in the future. Yeah, it was never meant to be a color run. It was it was meant to be a festival of color practiced by Sikhs and, as far as I know, Hindus alike, where you know, people are being joyful with each other and honoring each other and giving each other kind of blessings in that way. And then somebody else says, I have been seeing more and more each Christmas that many are viewing this holiday for commercial gain and losing perspective, respect for the Christian belief and practice. Yeah, commercialization is one of the quickest and easiest routes to watering down the meaning of a holiday. And then here, how do your own spiritual biases and practices affect what work you will or will not do? So, for example, we saw a lot this year and last year, particularly about whether businesses would serve gays and lesbians, and about whether transgenders would be allowed to have certain medical procedures. And you know, with regard to spiritual practices, like something like a bris or a wake or some other service for someone who's born or is dying, you know, it can have an effect on what you will or will not do at work, but your work can also be demanding of you about what you must do, whether you feel it appropriate or not, like perhaps returning too soon to work after grieving a death, or not being able to get off time off work to go to a bris or something like that. Then I wanted to give you a little research on this from the current year. In the last 20 years, research on implicit social cognition has established that social judgments and behavior are guided by attitudes and stereotypes of which the actor may lack awareness. Research using the methods of implicit social cognition has produced the concept of implicit bias, which has generated wide attention, not only in social, clinical, and developmental psychology, but also in disciplines outside of psychology, including business, law, criminal justice, medicine, education, and political science. And we're going to go a lot more in depth into the implicit bias material as we move forward here in the presentation, beginning right now, with the good news that implicit social cognition can change. When the concept was first introduced in the 1990s, implicit social cognition was believed to be automatic, unavoidable, and immutable. Why? Because it's unconscious, right? And if that were true, then it would be futile to invest effort in attempting to change implicit social cognition. those with policy responsibility would have to consider alternative strategies about social change, because ISE would be very slow to change, if at all. But today, the understanding of ISE is evolving. And recent research shows that ISE is indeed capable of changing over a period of about 19 or 18 years. The researchers just came out with this very year, and you can look up the materials on it in the link there. And we're going to continue to go a little deeper into this about why change in ISE succeeds or fails. So there was this thing called Project Implicit Demonstration, and it provided 4.4 million tests of implicit attitudes collected from 2007 to 2016 across attitudes, race, skin tone, disabilities, age, and body weight. And Project Implicit was performed by Harvard University staff and faculty and researchers. And they found that implicit attitudes, well, not that they found, this is how they measured implicit attitudes. They used something called the implicit association test, which bypasses the need for verbal self-report and gathers responses to congruent pairs of pictures with words good or bad, plus the speed for being measured for incongruent pairs of pictures. The greater the difference in how fast the participants categorize the pairs, the greater the implicit association. So again, that was done in 2019, and you can read about that in the area cited below. But let's find out the results of that. So this brings up, it brought up, one of the areas that it brought up was the concepts of ethnocentrism versus cultural competence. So ethnocentrism, down at the bottom, I wrote about that it means centering one's worldview strictly around one's own ethnicity, which leads to microaggression and potential violence against outsiders. And this holds particularly true with regard to spirituality as well. People will see certain religions as aggressive or even terroristic, and other religions as favored, or even the only way or the only one. And that's an ethnocentristic point of view. In contrast, cultural competence, when we take cultural competency training, it aims to empower learners to take proactive roles in order to contribute to a more inclusive workplace. Core concepts of cultural competency include spiritual competency, awareness of one's own biases and reactions, trust, respect for, and openness to different cultural perspectives, and working towards cultural security in the form of equal opportunity, equity, fairness, and social justice, as we saw on a previous slide. The 4 dimensions of cultural competence are awareness, attitudes, knowledge, and skills. And you're going to see these things come up on your quiz, so pay particular attention to this slide. Cultural competencies include the ability to recover from cultural conflict. So for example, when somebody said, oh, I didn't know that information about Holi, I will rethink how I approach the quote unquote color run. That's a good example of the ability to recover from a cultural conflict, to be able to offer to someone that, hey, thanks for the new information. Hey, I'm going to take that into account in my future practices. That's beautiful and wonderful, and that's what we want to see. The cultural competence model is a spectrum that spans from cultural destructiveness to cultural proficiency. And I think that's an area that we haven't given great emphasis to previously, is that some of our practices are downright culturally destructive. They're not benign. They're not microaggressions. They're major macroaggressions, and destructive at that. And so very important for our implicit social cognition to change. And we saw that the research went to 2016, and we also saw that since 2016, we had some kind of a pendulum swing to 2020, and now we're trying to see if it is swinging back in another direction. So we have to be cognizant of what's going on there and watch that very carefully. So let's look more deeply at microaggression versus inclusion in the mental health workplace. Let's talk out loud, if you would, about what is microaggression to you and how does it relate to spiritual competence, and or how do you strive for inclusion, spiritually speaking? What do cultural dignity and spiritual respect mean to you? Is spiritual competence a corporate or personal obligation in addressing cultural diversity, or is it both? What challenges are there in honoring personal beliefs and practices, like on the slides that we were looking at previously? Is there an alignment between your personal and organizational development in cultural and spiritual competence? And how do you uncover individual and corporate implicit bias? So if anybody wants to tackle any one of those questions and start up a discussion in that area, that would be awesome. We have 31 participants, so we're not going to get to everybody, obviously, but it's wonderful if somebody can pick up one of these questions and begin to do a deep dive personally on it. Do you invite people to your spiritual celebrations so that they don't get misappropriated? So that you'll have an opportunity to teach people about it.
I can try to tackle the first question.
Yeah.
So what is microaggression and how does it relate to spiritual competence? I think microaggressions are subtle discrimination, whether overt or covert, and how do they relate to spiritual competence? I know for me, I'm in Louisiana, and so the preferred religion is Christianity. And so everything's kind of focused around that. And so a lot of times in personal and professional life, there is not like a difference in how people approach religion. Like it's automatically assumed that if you stay in Louisiana, you're Southern, you're Christian. And so a lot of times, a lot of people are insensitive to that difference, I think. And so for me personally, being more spiritual, like I'll reiterate like, hey, you know what, maybe that person's not Christian, you know, they may be more spiritual, they may be non-religious. Like that's something that you have to consider. Everyone in this state is not a Christian. So I guess that's kind of like going into the second question, like how do I strive for inclusion? Doing a lot of self-reflection and having those moments of, hey, like an ouch and educate moment to where you may not have meant it to be intentional, but let me at least give you some advice, or let me give you some pointers, or let me allow you to reconsider it from a different vantage point.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a writer in the chat box previously who talked about how earth-based religions are often made out to be evil. And you know, when you think about it, even such things as the names of the days of the week and the months of the year, you know, all of those things used to be like named after like planets and stuff. Like Monday was Moon Day, right? And you know, so on and so forth. But they all got changed to make sure that they're less recognizable as to reverencing nature. Why we would want to do that is only because there was a need to ensure that the dominant religion was the one that was recognized and stayed on top. So look at, the names of the months, like September. If you look in Latin, that would have been the 7th month, but it's the 9th month, right? Because they had to rename it and reorder it and everything it to make sure that it didn't reflect any kind of previous associations with anything to do with, reverencing nature. Another person is saying, I'm in the Bay Area, California, with such a diverse community. Our elementary school honors diversity with recognition and celebrating breaking bread, where students bring their bread to share it with classmates and open a discussion about it. That sounds really cool because of all the different types of breads that one could have and all the different meanings and spiritual connotations that breaking bread together can have with each other. So that sounds really beautiful. Someone wrote in the last question, I definitely think that opening yourself to conversations may be uncomfortable, and learning from those that you may hold implicit biases regarding can be helpful in the long run. And I think that's key, is that we be willing to be uncomfortable so that we can learn. Learning isn't always comfortable. Think about when you first learned to ride a bike and you fell off and skinned your elbow or your knee. It wasn't comfortable, but then you became free when you were able to ride. Even someday you maybe ended up being able to ride without hands, right? And somebody agreed, saying, or even though they were the first one to say, I find asking people questions about their own spirituality opens the door for mutual respect. And in Quakerism, which I have spent some time studying, there is something called mutual illumination. And there is a practice of ecumenism, of sharing and trying to care for each other's ways of practicing spirituality and learning about them. Mutual irradiation is another term for it. And okay, let's see, there's a new message as well. I'm seeing a lot of aggression between religions and politics that influence corporate practices and much bias depending on perspectives. Yeah, religion and politics also very much often get mixed in with each other. In some ways, there can be a benefit to using your religion or informing your political practice through the brighter, higher side of your religion, like openness and welcomingness and all of that kind of thing. But there's also a detrimental way in which it could be used, an ethnocentristic way in which it can be used, whereas it's our way or no way at all. That can influence politics in a negative way. So it's a double-edged sword, is it not? And we have to take really good care about how we approach these things. I think of, say, for example, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and how he took a political stance in a very positive way, trying to open things up, trying to make things more inclusive for everyone, and how in his aftermath, the King Center still exists, and there is still work being done in that regard and in that area. And those are some positive ways of religion informing politics. But we have also seen some negative ways of religion informing politics, where it's possible, like way back in the day, the Crusades, right, where people would be martyred for their religion because it wasn't the right one, quote unquote, and how a lot of that is still going on today, but we just don't call it a crusade. Or even in the witch hunts, right? The Salem witch trials in our own country, in our own time, in our own day. and so many other examples that so many others of you can offer and give. So very, very important that we take into consideration whether we are being culturally destructive or culturally promoting, and similarly with regard to spirituality. There's this concept called xenophobia, and I want to share with you. We're going to define it. We're also going to talk about what it means to you. But basically, it's, as you know, being mental health professionals, a phobia is a fear, an irrational fear. And xeno comes from the Latin for outside, other, foreign. And so what we're dealing with here is the fact that fear breeds negativity and hate. And fear rushes people into quick judgment in attempts to protect themselves from a perceived threat, whether that threat is real or imagined. And engaging in dialogues about them can increase fear. The more we talk it up, show it, share it, the bigger it snowballs. Whereas in contrast, if we dialogue with them, then we grow to learn about each other and can do things like break bread together and share spiritual practices together and celebrate what we have in common, and even celebrate the differences. There is, in xenophobic ways of looking at the world, a need to protect one's race and one's religion, as if somehow mixing it is bad or wrong. There was a time when you might not have seen a Catholic and a Jewish person marrying each other. And it's yet so beautiful when you see a celebration like that. Perceptions that outsiders are bad or threatening the economy or our purity or even our religion are all part of xenophobia. So, for example, in some religious practices, there is a welcoming of gays and transgenders, and in some religions, there is a pushing away and a making bad of people who are born as they are born. And so it becomes very touchy and very tricky how we're going to handle those situations, especially in the workplace, especially when people are coming to us for mental health help. Someone is saying, even as Georgia politics does not allow one to offer water in the voting line, yes, that is a political way that things are coming to the fore in a negative, and we don't know how much of that is informed by religion or beliefs about religion. But one of the strange things about if there is a religious basis to it in any way is that a lot of people in Georgia are Southern Baptist, whether they're Black, white, or people of another color. And so we end up being threatening to people of our own religion or spirituality if we act in those ways, right? Then let's see what else happened here. Okay, after this xenophobia, then we want to look at here again, going a little deeper, national and office politics. Is there a relationship? And we're saying that quite literally there has been recently. So let's talk a little bit more about our cultural and spiritual competency perennial, something that is like forever, or our ethical obligations, kind of just more pendulum swings. Under this administration we do like this, and under that administration we do like that. And on top of that, legal, mental health, and governmental agencies, are they protective as they're meant to be, or are they hypocritical? And how do we hold ourselves accountable to regulatory standards against discrimination, especially and even if our companies are not doing so or pretending to do so, giving them lip service. I know of a person who is in a mental health crisis right now because they work for an agency that is supposed to be protective against discrimination, and they themselves are being discriminated against. And like, where do you go then? Who do you appeal to then? If the agency that is meant to be protecting against such things and you work for them and they're discriminating against you, now what? Scary, scary stuff. So again, I would very much support if anybody would be willing to come off mic, rather on mic, off mute, and tackle one of these questions, sharing their insight, their experience, their wisdom, their knowledge, and maybe any hopes or strengths that they've found in these areas as well. Or if you prefer to use the chat box, that's fine too. But it's so lovely when we get to hear other voices besides mine. We have about 9 more minutes together and we'll be wrapping up soon. So this is your opportunity. There's probably a reason why 32 of you joined this discussion and this learning session. So I want to make sure you're getting out of it what you wanted to get out of it, and that you're able to express any questions, comments, or concerns before we close out. So someone says, Christianity is in this very weird place where they have representation without taxation. Even as a Christian, I find it disturbing to be in Christian spaces with liberal views. We have representation without taxation. Oh yes, how churches, nonprofit churches are able to not be taxed. And they have sometimes even yet a big voice in politics. And so that can feel a little unbalanced, right? And certainly we don't want a situation where we have taxation without representation, but this is the opposite end of the spectrum where we have representation without taxation, and so there can feel like there's a disequity and an imbalance around. It would seem that it would be more appropriate if our representation and our taxation go hand in hand, that we don't get taxed without being represented, and we don't have representation without also making a contribution to our infrastructure and the health, welfare, and well-being of our fellow humans in the community. But I think one of the reasons that this happens is because religions are considered as in and of themselves automatically making a contribution to community by their very existence. And so I think that's one of the reasons it can happen. Another thing that comes up is the question of making sure that there is a difference and a distance between church and state. And we get scared when church and state are one, but we also get scared when they're too divided and not talking to each other. Someone says, I have experience with government agencies having policies in place to protect diversities. However, when certain instances arise to the forefront, these agencies tend to sway toward their personal corporate beliefs and biases. Yeah, this is a very big area of contention, that we put these agencies in place to do a specific job, and then we also have the wolves guarding the hen house, so to speak, where so you have the hen house to protect the hens, but then you put the wolves in charge of the hen house, and you've just cut yourself off at the knees in terms of being able to do that protection. And it can be very undermining and undercutting and self-sabotaging. So we have to be very careful that when we're creating agencies and creating regulations and creating a corporate culture in our own workplace, that our deeds are matching our actions, right? Like, so from a spiritual perspective, we can talk faith and practice, right? We might have faith in our agencies, but in practice, how are they performing, and what should we do about that? Okay, thanks for the discussion on that, ladies and gentlemen. And so I want to offer a little conclusion about what they did find in those analytic studies about diversity. So here it talks about data from nearly 6 million respondents show that implicit and explicit attitudes and beliefs about minority groups, and that includes religious minority groups, can and do change. This change is widespread among most demographic groups, and this was studied by the University of Massachusetts. And they have a whole Department of Employment Equity. And so it talks about implicit attitudes and beliefs have shown to predict discriminatory behaviors. And so understanding the nature of implicit social cognition and its capacity to limit change remains a worthy endeavor. So we want to see that we use the capacity for implicit social cognition to change, to influence it to change for more inclusivity rather than for less. So I wanted to throw up the references, so that you'll be able to see where to get more information on each and every one of the slides and the points that we made about xenophobia, microaggression, ethnocentrism, implicit social cognition. So all of these ones here are clickable. And for the ones that are not clickable, you just copy and paste the ending numbers into a search box, and you'll be able to pull up whatever article it is. So with that, I would like to thank you all very much for your participation. I'm so pleased to see that we had 32 people in this lesson. And if there's any last minute questions, comments, or concerns, we have precisely 2 minutes to deal with them. Then we have a chatter. Thank you. Awesome. I thank you as well. I really appreciate your attendance, and I hope that you all do well on your quiz and get your CEUs for today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all of you very much. And a new message, another thanks. Sweet. And great discussion and interaction. I'm really glad that you guys participated in the interaction and discussion. You will access the quiz through, there's going to be, let me get the fellow who's doing the room, I thank him too. His name is Kevin. Let me see if Kevin is here to talk about how you access the quiz. And I think it's post post session. So after we stop the share, there should be a way. Okay, Kevin Skiles says he can post the questions here. He's our room monitor. Thank you very much, Kevin. But I don't think answering them here will be how you get your CEUs. I think there is a CEU tab that you'll have to go to in the materials that you were sent for the fact that you signed up for the class. And when you answer the questions there, that's how you'll get the credit. But here we can post the questions just so you'll be familiar with what you're going to be looking for. So define spiritual competence. What is one way you will address spiritual competence? Oh, these are the polling questions, but I'm talking about the quiz questions. So the polling questions were just for us to be able to share and discuss together and interact with each other. But there will also be quiz questions that you'll be able to access outside of our session today for you to be able to get your CEUs. So whoever sent you the link to this presentation and there should be the slides that go with the link. These slides should come with it. Then there should also be a quiz for you to take as well to get your CEUs. All right. So it being 10:01, we have to close down because there might be other sessions that other people have to attend or other things that other folks have to do. But again, thank you very much for your sharing and participation. Take care.